भारत कीर्ति सीरीज।
नमस्ते। हरिः ॐ। सहस्रशीर्षा पुरुषः सहस्राक्ष सहस्रपात् स भूमिं विश्वतो वृत्वा अत्यतिष्ठ दशाङ्गुलम्। तस्मादश्वा अजायन्त ये के चोभयादत जातो ह जगीरे तस्माज्जाता अजावयः। ब्राह्मणस्य मुखमासीत् बाहुराजन्यकृतः ऊरु तदस्य यद्वैश्यः पदभ्यां शूद्रो अजायत। चन्द्रमा मनसो जातः चक्षो सूर्यो अजायतः। मुखादिन्द्रः च अग्नि च प्राणाद्वायु अजायत। नाभ्या आसीदन्तरिक्षं शीर्षणोऽद्यो संवर्तत। पदभ्यां भूमि दिशं श्रोत्रातः तथा लोकाग्म अकल्पयन्। This was the Purush Sukt, and I will tell you later in this episode why I started with this Purush Sukt from the Rig Veda. Namaste again. It's been a long gap, but I hope you haven't forgotten Mauryalok, the citizens of Mauryalok, and the commentator, that is me. You have been in my thoughts all along this long gap. Just to brush up a bit, we are talking about one of the angs of the Saptang state, that is Janpad, the land and the people. And today we will look at social organization. So, how was Mauryan society organized? It's very simple. I can state it in one sentence. It was organized according to the Varn Ashram Dharma and the Purusharths, stated simply, but its complexities are absolutely legion. Let me start with the Varn Vyavastha, the Varn Jati system, which is translated into English, although it's actually a Portuguese word, as the caste system. This translation has led to an almost complete loss of meaning. Make no mistake, the Varn Jati system is not the same as the caste system that we know today. I request you, I implore you, for the next 10 minutes, rid yourself of all the notions you had about caste and approach this subject with a clean slate. You can come back to the critique later. I will have certain references for you to look at. So the Varna Jati system, as it existed, was a little different from the caste system as we know it, and that's an understatement. The caste system has certain characteristics. It is a hierarchical division of society into 4 varnas: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. Entry into each jati is by birth only. There is endogamy within castes, there is an occupational framework, there is a rigidity, there is a hierarchy which leads to exploitation because the Brahmins are sitting at the top of this particular pyramid. That is caste as we know it. Did you notice me using the word jati? So the Varna Jati system is often used in confusing ways, and whether jati corresponds to caste or a subcaste is a very big question. So why this confusion? Why do we understand the caste system as in a very different way from what perhaps it was? This is because, as is true of all our epistemology, all our understanding, we are looking at ourselves through the eyes of outsiders. It was Western Indologists, starting from the 17th century, who came into contact with Indian society, first as travelers, tourists, later as missionaries, traders, and finally as colonialists and rulers. They try to understand Indian society, the Indian Varna Jati Vyavastha, in their own terms. And what were their terms? They had a Christian Old Testament and New Testament Protestant kind of view. So India was added to another list of those heathen nations where a whole group of warring tribes, here known as castes, were kept together by the Brahmins at the top. They took their model from the Jewish Gentile nation and the Levite priesthood. I cannot say any more about it, but for those who wish to learn more, there will be references in the comment box. As time went on and there were more studies about caste, things became worse. Take Louis Dumont, for example. He has written the book called Homo Hierarchicus, and it is the single most influential book on caste studies in the entire universe of caste studies. So he pit Homo Hierarchicus, that was the Indian hierarchical exploitative structure, against Homo Equalis, that was the French liberté, égalité, fraternité, the wonderful post-revolutionary France where equality was all. So he wished to show a contrast between backward, regressive, hierarchical Hindu society and equal, fraternal and just French society. So he built this theoretical framework without enough evidence. He admits to the gaps in evidence himself, but somehow these gaps have been lost, and the idea that Homo Hierarchicus is the representation of Indian society is now part of our blood and bones. We just can't get away from it. So let me now tell you what the Varna Jati system actually was, and I will be taking not just the theoretical structure from the Dharma Sutras, but I will be talking about Kautilya. He was one of the lawgivers himself, and I will be talking to you about what is written in the Arthashastra. So there were 4 varnas, and here you can see, scrolling beside me, the way that all these 4 varnas were supposed to occupy their time. There are no surprises here. For Brahmins, it is education, it is yajan and yajan. For Kshatriyas, it is rakshan. For Vaishyas, it is commerce. And do note that 2 of these jatis had the right to conduct yagyas for themselves, and Brahmins had the right to conduct yagyas for others, that is yajan. And in fact, it is a very important function of the Brahmin. But now look at the description for Shudras. It's here that the surprise lies. From what we have understood of the mainstream narrative about caste is that Shudras were the humiliated dregs of society, exploited by all those who were above them. Does that seem to be true from this description? Not really. See what it says. Shudras are to practice Varta. What is Varta? Business. What else is written here? Karu, Kushilav, Karma. What does this mean? Karu means doer. It includes poet and architect. It includes the subjects of science. It includes artisans. It includes architecture. And Karu, Kushilav, Karma, it means bards, minstrels, newsmongers, heralds, etc. So does this seem to you as if this is the absolutely ignored and exploited dregs of society? Absolutely not. Karu were the doers of society. And we go back to the Purush Sukt. Where does the Shudra class originate from? Padabhyam. That is from the lower part of the body. This whole cosmic Purush, the doer, that which moves this Purush, is the Shudra class. So far from being the humiliated dregs, exploited dregs of society, they were the movers and shakers and doers. And look at another thing. Kautilya has quite a few surprises and quite a few shocks for us. So Shudras were admitted into the army. So the army could be Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya or Shudra. And in one of his shloks, he says that a Shudra strong army is better than a Brahmin army. Do note in passing that all 4 varnas were allowed to be recruited into the army, which is a far cry from the occupational inflexibility and rigidity that classical caste theory speaks of. I will move on to yet another grassroots reflection of the Varna Vyavastha, which the caste system has never been able to catch up to. The number, complexity, and interrelationship of the thousands of jatis that existed in the subcontinent, and they existed also during modern times. The Arthashastra mentions a few of them. You can see them scrolling down. There are Rajukas such as washermen, then there are goldsmiths, there are leather workers, there are also tailors. So there are a number of jatis, and you can see from the names that these are connected to the occupations that they follow. So what is the picture that we are getting? The Varna Vyavastha exists only in theory. Even as far as endogamy is concerned, which is strict marriage only within castes or subcastes, this was not true in practice. And in fact, in the Arthashastra, there is a long list of rules of exogamy about who could marry whom and what would happen after they got married. So exogamy definitely existed, and endogamy was not a strict characteristic. As far as birth being the only way to enter into a caste is concerned, there is no such injunction in the Arthashastra. And in fact, we do know that Chandragupta himself was not born a Kshatriya according to most evidence, and he became a Kshatriya through his actions. Pushyamitra Sung, the Brahmin Senapati of Chandragupta Maurya, was not a Kshatriya either. So there are very startling examples which go against the classic theory of caste, which we find during the Mauryan period. Other than the four castes I have spoken about, there were also Chandals who were separate from all these. Then you also had Ataviks. Ataviks are very important. These are the forest tribes. Those we call Adivasis today. Adivasi is nomenclature gifted to us by the missionaries to pretend that they were the original inhabitants, and those ubiquitous Aryans had come over and taken over the land of the Adivasis. There is no such word in any Indian source. These were called Atviks, and they were also very important for recruitment into the army because they made excellent fighters. They were also called Mlech. Other than that, there were also Bahiriks. These Bahiriks were what we would call roving gypsies. And of course, you had people who did not follow Sanatan Dharma. There were Jains, there were Buddhists, there were Ajiviks, there were the Pashans. So all these lived according to their own rules, but these were not too different from what I have been explaining to you right now. So I think you get the picture. The Varna Jati system during the time of the Arthashastra was not at all the ossified, rigid, hierarchical, endogamous structure based on purity, pollution, the difference between sacred and profane that we have been taught. Now we will move on to ashram. Ashrams are very familiar to us, although I must say that in the entire study of Indian society, the Varna, Ashram and Purusharth system, Varna has been the focus of thousands and millions of people. Ashram has not been so much of a focus, although it was a way of organizing life. So what is it? We understand it as a chronological stage of life. The brahmachari is the student. He or she grows up, becomes a grihasth, and then a vanprasth, and then a sannyasi. You can see how this pans out. But there is another way of looking at the ashram system, and that is actually the way Kautilya looks at it. That is, these four systems as choices. Gautam Rishi calls it Vikalp. So are these four models of life that you can follow? That you can be a student all your life if you wish, or you can be a grihastha, or you can just take off into the forest, or you can just renounce the world. Yes, indeed, that is the way we can see it being done in the Arthashastra, because Kautilya makes it very clear that a student can remain a student all of his or her life if they so wish. And do remember that the ashram system was accessible also to women, therefore I keep using his or her. Now, if it was a vikalp, if it was a choice, was it that people made many kind of strange choices and everyone gave up the world? No. The maximum number of choices, the average way of living was grihasthi. Most people chose to get married. There were some few who would either remain students all their lives. If they were women, they were called Brahmavadinis. And there were others who also chose to renounce life, as in the sannyasis. But remember, those who renounced life, the Arthashastra calls them parivrajaks. There were many rules before you could just renounce your entire family and your entire life and go away, because there were people dependent on you. So you had to take certain permissions, there were certain rules to follow. And also, once you made a choice, you couldn't toggle between choices. So you couldn't change your mind all the time. It was not that easy. It was in fact extremely difficult. But Kautilya, being the very cunning man that he was, used those parivrajaks who wished to enter back into Grihasthi as spies. And remember, we have spoken about these in an earlier episode. When we talk about Grihasthi, we talk about Vivah. So there were 8 types of Vivah. The first was Brahma Vivah, where there was a Kanyadan. The second was Prajapatya Vivah, where the couple took a solemn decision to follow dharma together. You can see it in this illustration. Then you had an Arsh Vivah, where cattle was given in exchange for the bride. Then you had a Dev Vivah, which was done in sitting in a proper Yagyavedi, sitting around a proper Yagyavedi. Then you had a Gandharv Vivah, which was only between the man and the woman. So a kind of really a love marriage, as we would term it today. Then you had an Asur Vivah, which meant that some dowry was exchanged. You had a Rakshas Vivah, which was marriage through abduction. And you had a Pishach Vivah, which was marrying a woman who was intoxicated, asleep, or in some other way incapacitated. So can you see the sensitivity towards issues of women and the consent of women that is shown in these 8 different kinds of vivahs? Of course, it is in the context of society and family. For Indic social organization, vivah was not normally between 2 people, but between 2 families, and it brought the community together. Sensitivity towards women is also shown in so many of the laws and precepts which guide marriage. Then there were laws against desertion, against harassment of wives, and there were laws for remarriage, for divorce, and widows, in fact, were quite a rich and happy lot, as we can read from different parts of the Arthashastra. Women were also entitled to maintenance and Stridhan. The amount of maintenance has been put at a maximum of 2,000 punds, and believe me, that is quite a fortune. I don't think every woman would have got that much for maintenance, but this maintenance, as well as Stridhan was gold ornaments and the Kansya household vessels. These were the entire property. I mean, they were the unique property of women, and they could dispose of these things as they wished. There were also other rules and laws of inheritance, but those were very complex and we will not be able to go into them right now. So it was the Purusharths, the Trivarg, as the Arthashastra and Kautilya call these Purusharths, which governed and which gave a kind of system of thinking. So these were Dharma, Arth and Kam. Given the fact that we are talking about Kautilya, of course, he thought that Arth was the most important, since Dharma and Kam depended on it. But he also said that Arth and Kam should always be dharmic in nature. And of course, he also said that there should be a balance between Dharma, Arth and Kam. So both for society and for individuals, there has to be a balance between Dharma, Arth and Kam. Now, isn't that an excellent idea? Isn't that an excellent precept? To have desires and goals which are in balance. And it is very far from this extremely pious and saintly idea that we have of ancient India, that they were only philosophers and saints. Certainly not. If Arth was the most important and Arth led to calm or enjoyment, you can imagine that people had lots of material ideas and material aspirations that they used to fulfill. So this is as far as the Purusharths are concerned. As I had promised you, I'm going to take just a peek into the law and justice system, because unfortunately we don't have time for more. So there are 2 chapters in the Arthashastra, the Dharmasthiyam and Kantakshodhanam. The rules and laws put in place here help to keep the social organization in place. So in the Kantakshodhan chapter, there are things which militate against social organization, which are the thorns of social organization against it, so to speak. These are murder, assault, rape, corruption, cheating, thieving, etc. And it's called suppression of criminals, and suppression of these activities is how that is to be done is written in this chapter. Then you have Dharmasthiyam, which is concerning judges and how they work, and this deals more with laws of contracts, sale and purchase, partnerships, gifts, transactions, etc. There were judges at every level of administration. Guilds had their own judges and their own system, but the king was the final arbiter of all. So let me conclude now by saying that this is an image of a complex, flexible, and mobile social organization where things were moving all the time. It was a dynamic society and things were changing and moving all the time, perhaps very similar to the way we are right now. Today, we have the same kind of different, huge number of castes, lots of different relations between them. Although I must say that the period of colonization, the British caste census, and the Indian constitution's understanding of caste has muddied the waters. However, it is still very much the same. Hierarchies are not fixed. There is also exogamy. And there is that complexity which makes it very difficult to understand caste either then or now. Let me assure you as a sociologist that we still do not have a definition of caste. Although Varn and Ashram and Purusharths are definitely the lodestones of Mauryan social organization. Next time, I will be with you with yet another facet of the Janpad. Namaskar.
In the next episode, we will talk about something very close to our hearts. Something which gives joy and meaning to our lives. It involves all things divine and human. Puja, new clothes, sweets, merriment, community togetherness, and happiness. Yes, you guessed it. We will talk about the religions and festivals of the Mauryans.